On the 29th of January 2026, Captain Ibrahim Traoré's military government took the unprecedented step of formally dissolving all 100 political parties in Burkina Faso. Now, while party activities had been suspended since the 2022 coup, this total abolition and the seizure of all political assets marks a final, chilling divorce from democratic norms. Now, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has effectively hit the delete button on Burkina Faso's political landscape. The government claims that this move is necessary to stop internal bickering and focus solely on fighting terrorism. It's a classic power play. So for an average person, this shift means that any form of organized dissent has become illegal. Now, the government is moving away from Western-style democracy in favor of total military control. Joining us on the conversation to speak more on this, we have Godwin Toko, his deputy team leader, Agora Center for Research. And we also have Abdulatif Ahmed, his News Central's head of research and digital news editor. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us at this time.
Thank you for having me.
So let me begin with Godwin. Godwin, Captain Traoré's government moved from suspending the parties to abolishing them entirely. Why take this absolute step now, nearly 4 years into military rule?
Yeah, thank you. So the more I read about Ibrahim Traoré's government, the more I see the similarities with the government that was in Uganda in the 70s, unfortunately, that being the government of Idi Amin. So military governments tend to be governments of action. Every now and then they have to give people something new. They have to find a scapegoat to blame. They have to, it's like an action-packed movie. Every now and then there's something going on. So that's why every now and then you hear that there's a coup attempt in Burkina Faso that has been foiled. There's an assassination attempt that has been foiled. Of course, it's hard to verify if they are true in the first place, but that is again very, very similar to what happened in Uganda in the 70s. But now, about the political parties particularly, again, let me start by saying that Idi Amin himself banned political parties, and with some sort of reason. Because in the 60s, Uganda had political parties that had turned the country into a very tumultuous period. You had the Democratic Party and the Uganda People's Congress that were fighting every now and then, and that led to the government of Obote banning the parties, suspending the opposition party and staying only with the ruling party. But when Amin became president, he banned the parties entirely. Now, back to Traoré with that background that I've just said about Uganda and Amin, is that military governments are less likely to accept any form of dissent or criticism or any form of opposition. Now, lately, it's become the norm, unfortunately, for people who think that democracy is the best form of government, that even the elected government, even the government voted by the people, are not doing much better. But of course, it seems always much worse with military governments. For them, they don't seem to take any form of opposition. To this day in Uganda, we have a president who has been in power for about 40 years. But of course, he's a military man. He came through an armed struggle. You would call it a guerrilla warfare that lasted about 5 years. If you see the way opposition parties are treated in Uganda, it makes statements to the effect that there should be no opposition. So I think it is in their psyche that military men just can't seem to understand that there should be people who can hold different political views. And so when I saw that Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso had banned the opposition, it's just the same thing. It's that they don't want any form of dissent. They seem not to understand it. Like, let's have one thing. And of course, they will give very, very interesting reasons that seem valid, but on the face of it, it seems like, yeah, it's just another scapegoat.
Okay, so now let's come to Abdulatif. Abdul, the government actually claims that this move is about preserving national unity, but by silencing 100 different political voices, isn't the junta simply creating a pressure cooker, of underground dissent? That's something they are even scared of in the first place.
Well, most times when political parties are eliminated, it means that the government or the people in power want people to have just a singular or a narrow perspective to things. Therefore, everybody simply listens to the government and there's no dissent, no alternative views, no oversight, no checks and balances. So in essence, when you eliminate these political parties and people are unable to express, alternative views to what is happening in the country, they begin to form other, underground parties, underground movement. There's, sometimes civil dissent there's, it could lead to crisis in the country because sometimes there's even armed movement against the government in power. You can have an implosion, or those in the military who are even disenchanted against the government can begin to form internal ways to sabotage the government. So it's really not the best way around it, and it's a script like the other person mentioned.
Godwin.
It's a script that most military leaders play. Once they consolidate power, they get the buy-in of the electorates. They begin to go they take extraneous or extraordinary
measures.
Steps.
But the question now is, just like I asked earlier, why now, 4 years after?
Why what?
Why now, 4 years after?
Yes. So this is the pattern. They get the buy-in of the people. They ensure that a lot of people like them. They are populist. They do the things that people like and all that, and then they shut it out. They shut the entire system out of civilians and ensure that the military do not want alternative center of control. They simply want to be the monopolistic center of control, center of attention, and therefore they would eliminate all forms of civilian participation. That is how they go about it. Once they are strong, once they feel they have a better control of the system, they take out civilians.
All right, now let's come back to Godwin. The state is now seizing the buildings and funds of these parties. There are concerns that these resources might not be used, for the war effort, but for enriching the military elite. Let's have your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think it's more to enrich the military elite and then to further entrench the military rule in the country. And like Abu Latif said, it's at this point that now they've consolidated. They came on a very, very popular wave when they came, people like them. But now it's just, you're going to see that over the coming months and years, it's going to be the most likely pattern, as happens elsewhere, that they're going to begin demonizing the opposition groups, saying how they were working with imperialists, how they had failed across, the ones in the opposition, the ones in government, all the political parties that failed the country. So it is going to be a scapegoat that then turns back to them. Yes, but at the end of the day, I don't think that the seizing of the assets is going to be used in fight against the terrorism. It's going to be used to consolidate the military and entrench the military rule in Burkina Faso.
Do you feel the same way, Abdul Latif? Absolutely.
That is the case. It's not surprising. It's not surprising, really.
All right, so many of the parties now being wiped out, there are concerns that those were the very parties, the very ones that cheered Traoré's rise in 2022. So, it's baffling as to why the captain has decided that he no longer needs a civilian face for his government. What does that do to, the country as a whole?
Well, when you take out the civilians, you narrow the space for governance. Most times, there's an assumption that once the military comes into power, they are able to stabilize the country, eliminate terrorism, and set the country on the path of success. Don't forget that we used to have ECOWAS, which has a broader mandate. We used to have a collective counter-insurgency approach that included all the countries of West Africa. But now you have three countries, the Sahelian alliance. There's three countries working together. They will do everything to make it look good on the surface. But in reality, we realize that there's a worsening index of violence. Burkina Faso, the Burkinabe people do not feel safer today. The economy is not as healthy as it should be. And, essentially, in the absence of civilians, it's just be a direct command, a direct order from the top, and everybody falls into line. So that is what we are seeing at the moment.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to Godwin, with Russia now designated a strategic ally and the presence of the Africa Corps, which was formerly Wagner Group, to what extent is this no-party model being imported from Moscow?
Yeah, I think from the onset, the coup leaders in the Sahel, that IS group, they seem to be picking a lot from Russia. They seem to be getting instructions from Russia And like you mentioned, the Wagner, we saw the meeting with Putin. Of course, it's not bad for any African country. One of the things that I think that we need to understand, first of all, is that any African country should have alliances with any other country that they want. That's the epitome of sovereignty. But in this particular case, what you see with Russia is that they don't have the conventional democracy that, as you would understand it, or even the sovereignty of the people, or the will of the people to self-govern. So you're going to see more and more of that manifesting in Burkina Faso, because then they're going to get their instructions from a country that has had one president or one leader since the 2000s. Of course, sometimes it comes and goes, but yeah, you know where the power center truly lies. So you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see that there's going to be a lot. I mean, even Russia itself as a government is very militaristic. A lot of the things they do have that martial militaristic aspect to it, and already you see that playing out in Burkina Faso. So I think to some extent, they are trying to mirror a Russia in Africa or in Burkina Faso. Of course, Burkina Faso can never be Russia. It's a much smaller economy. It's a country with so many of its own problems, but they'll keep creating that illusion. And that's what comes with that, of course, also is this thing of saying that the West is bad, Macron is bad. And yes, Macron has a lot of blame to take. The West have a lot of blames to take for whatever happened in Burkina Faso before, and for whatever is happening on the African continent before. But the idea here is that they will pick it, exaggerate it, and then come up with a model that not that serves the African people, but then the one that serves and entrenches the ruling elite. So here's, just to conclude this, is that many times when African governments of this kind, or African regimes of this kind, start talking about imperialists, you should pay attention to who the victims, who the people they point the spotlight to as the imperialists become. It's normally the citizens of that country. When Idi Amin was saying that he was fighting against the apartheid government in South Africa and fighting against capitalism and the liberal policies of the West, the victims were not Americans, the victims were not British, the victims were Ugandans, because he just uses it as a smokescreen to target dissent at home. I don't think these governments ever care about imperialism. They really care about dissent at home because they are on very, very shaky grounds. Remember that they're not elected into office. They never participate in elections. So it's even hard to gauge what their popularity is at any one point in time. And then they create this environment of a lot of suspicion. Everyone is everyone is viewed as a threat. And so that's the kind of system that, well, in a large scale you see in Russia, but you're going to most likely see in Burkina Faso.
Okay. Now, Latif, let's go back to, the fact that the elections have been pushed back from 2024 and then to 2026 and now July 2029. So if there are no political parties, who exactly is supposed to run in 2029? Or is the very concept of an election being phased out?
Well, what you're saying is a closure of, the democratic space, and by eliminating political parties, everything that will happen hereafter will be choreographed. Basically, everything will be around defying or creating a lion image of the current military president. What you would have is that parties may be created at some point, but they will run their answers to the same person, meaning they can decide to adopt Ibrahim Traoré as their singular flag bearer. That way, they are all going to be campaigning and doing the same thing. Or alternatively, they can look for a flag bearer that cannot amount to anything, cannot mobilize people properly, cannot campaign properly, cannot push out his ideas, or even galvanize the people as it should be. And then you have a Traoré winning by a landslide of probably 99.9% or probably 95%. Some, exaggerated figures that just doesn't cut it. And then they celebrate their, choreographed wins and then continue in power. When he extends it to 2029 and he returns to power, he can decide again to extend it to 2039. The most important thing is to continue to give an illusion to the people that he's doing the right thing for the masses.
For the masses. All right. Now, there are reports, that journalists and judges who criticize the government, are being conscripted and sent to the front lines. First of all, I want to know, Godwin, how true is this? Do you have an idea? And what are your thoughts if it is actually true? Is the Burkinabe army being used as a tool of political punishment rather than national defense?
Yeah, so first of all, it's very hard to know because in governments like Burkina Faso, the information is greatly curtailed. They are barely independent journalists. They are reporting about what's happening in the country. So it's hard to tell. But then I wouldn't be surprised if that is happening because, again, military governments just hate any form of dissent. Because they do that, because they have that attitude towards dissent, dissent is many times viewed as rebel. I mean, sort of rebellion against the government. Mm-hmm. If you will give me a second, just in the case of Uganda, for instance, while the government has since transitioned, of course, it took long to transition. What you had asked earlier, that when will they have the elections? Uganda had a takeover by a rebel group in 1986. That group said they were here for 2 years. They extended that to 4 years. The person who led that military group has now been in power for 40 years, since 1986. Last month, July, he made 40 years in office, and he's still going for another 5 years. So the thing is that even when you look at how he treats the opposition, to this day, 40 years later, he talks of them as some sort of rebellion. I'm not meaning people who have arms and are fighting the government. I mean people who offer themselves to run for the presidency. We had an election in July, and the leading opposition candidate, the second runner-up, had to go into hiding because the army was looking for him, and the army commander was making statements on Twitter that he had to be punished, he's a traitor, and all these things. So yes, it's because of that attitude. So if it's not surprising then that in Burkina Faso there are these stories that judges and other civil servants who served the previous government are being sent out to the front line, because that's how these kinds of military governments, view any form of dissent, opposition, or a position that is different from theirs.
All right. Now, Latif, let's talk about the fatalities that have been linked to the Islamist violence, which have tripled in the last 3 years, reaching over 17,700 deaths, which is quite a lot if you ask me. So questions are being asked that if the political bickering of parties was the problem, why has security worsened since they were sidelined?
Well, when you sideline, political parties, you have fewer voices of reason. You have you do not have as many alternative ways to look at a problem. You only look at it from one angle. Whatever the president wants is what he gets. But in democratic spaces, you argue things, you debate ideas, you fine-tune ideas until you get what you need to push forward. What you are having in Burkina Faso security challenge is both structural and transnational. If you were dealing with, bandits and terrorists just within, the enclave, within the country itself, it would be understandable. But you are fighting with non-state actors from across several states, collaborating with, entities from across the world. They will come with different patterns and continue to assault the government in ways, or the people, in ways that are intended to confuse and destabilize, the country. So Burkina Faso will continue to battle with these, and it has, Russia itself, and then 2 other states or 2 other countries to align with in order to fight these people. So we can't tell really why this spate of unrest and insecurity has worsened, but it is understandable that you now have more porous borders, less coordination, more, the country is battling with its last line of defense. It will ordinarily be that the military will be called upon when there are emergencies that you cannot resolve. But now that line has been eliminated, and you have only the military battling insurgents in the country.
Well, Latif, since you mentioned, the AES, that's Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, do you think that this move to dissolve the parties is the first step in a coordinated regional plan to end the democratic experiment in the Sahel entirely? Because, Traoré has also called the Western-style democracy a luxury that the country cannot afford.
I think so. I mean, it's already evident in Niger and Mali. These presidents have overstayed their welcome, but they continue to extend their stay. So these are some of the, methods that juntas will put in place to ensure that they stay long in power. Just, in fact, don't be surprised that in the next dispensation, Traoré can take off his uniform and then be in civilian gears, you know. Yeah. So it's just same wine, different bottles.
We've seen that happen in other countries as well. Now, coming back to you, Godwin, with 15 of the dissolved parties having held seats in the previous parliament, what happens to millions of voters who now have no legal channel to express their grievances?
Yeah, that's the tricky bit of it, because human dissent and opposition will always exist, because by the nature of being humans, we have very different views. So you're looking at maybe one of the worst case scenarios is probably that you're going to have underground resistance. Sometimes political open opposition gives avenue for people to vent out their opinions in a place where they can be heard, or maybe not heard, but at least they can do it in a more cordial and amicable manner. So if it's banned, then maybe some of them will pick up arms. Some of these groups could say, okay, the only way out here is to pick up arms, which you're seeing as, for instance, happening in Myanmar or now Obama, that some of the opposition groups, even would-be opposition groups, picked up arms and they're fighting the junta there. But also, I don't think the junta cares about people's views. For me, that's the basis. They think they are right. They think that opposition or different views to theirs is forbidden, it's illegal, it's immoral, whatever you call it. They think it's something that just shouldn't exist at all. So they don't care about the people's views being heard or not being heard at all. And yeah, the banning of political parties serves that purpose. For me and you who believe that people's views should be heard, it's a very, very big deal. For them internally, I don't think it's a big deal. Like otherwise we'll discuss it to be.
The people support them either way. So let's take final thoughts quickly in 1 minute. Let's take your final thought, Godwin, before we come to Latif. Godwin?
Okay, so I think one, yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Please, in 1 minute.
Yeah, I think one, yes, Ibrahim Traoré seems to be very popular. I think one of these days he should just do the right thing, and that right thing is to subject himself to criticism, to opposition, and to all these other forms. It doesn't have to be elections, it doesn't have to be a form of democracy as I would want it to be, but it can be something that they come up with, even something organic, which Africans have been talking about, but should be something that allows different views to be heard, because the views of the millions of Burkinabes are always going to be superior to his view as an individual or the view of a few men at the end of the day.
All right. Now let's come back to you, Latif. I mean, history shows that when political valves are closed, the only remaining path for change is another coup. So do you think that Captain Traoré is making himself more secure or more vulnerable to the next ambitious officer in the ranks?
Well, in a country that is not as stable as it should be, all of these actions that are meant to secure the president's stay would end up being his Achilles heel, because it will open him to more aggressive reactionary tendencies from within the army and then from the civilians who may get tired of his reign in power. Once he exhausts his ideas, there's nothing new. They begin to think of how to either eliminate him or force him out of power.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for a very, very interesting conversation. Godwin Toko, Deputy Team Leader, Agora Center for Research in Uganda. And we also had Abdulatif Ahmed, News Central's Head of Research and Digital News Editor. Thank you once again.